Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tulpa Time. After a 2-month hiatus, we're both very glad to be back. I'm your host, Lyrical, and this is my co-host.
I'm Longbow.
And it's good to be back doing this. So today, our topic for discussion is going to be Tulpa in popular culture, or things that seem to be allusions to Tulpa, or things similar to Tulpa in popular culture. And later on, we're going to discuss how that pertains to society's view at large with tulpamancy and tulpas and imaginary friends for adults in quotation marks. And there have been, over the years, and dating as far back to 1950, several publications and or movies that have come out about phenomena that we in the community would consider to be similar to tulpamancy or similar to the tulpa phenomenon.
Yeah, you can at least draw allusions and see how they would be kind of similar of an experience.
Definitely.
So the first one was actually a film from a long time ago.
1950.
1950, the golden age of cinema, black and white. It's a movie called Harvey, based on a very famous play at the time. And it features a sort of wealthy man who lives in a house with his sister and her daughter. And this guy, Elwood P. Dowd, sees a 6-foot-tall rabbit.
Anthropomorphic rabbit.
Yes, that's right. Not to say he would be like the same anthropomorphic that we know today, but...
No.
But anyway, he tends to like the drink a little bit, and he, goes around, walks around, does whatever, and talks to and interacts with this basically imaginary friend.
And it's very unabashedly the way he does it too. He talks to this imaginary, in quotation marks, friend of his, Harvey, in such a way that you would speak to anyone else on the street, a human being. Like this character, Harvey, is real in his head. Yeah. Like, so real. And society around him, well, I'll let you go ahead and tell that part.
Yeah. Society around him, like his sister and her daughter, are just going out of their minds because of the social ramifications that this guy is doing.
He's
this.
Crazy.
Yeah, they're getting all hysterical and whatnot, back when hysteria was a thing. And they're, so worked up about this that they want to have him committed. And one of my favorite parts in the movie is actually when his sister goes to a mental institution and starts talking to the psychiatrist there, like the head psychiatrist.
He's a bit of an asshole.
Yeah, he's a bit of a douche.
Yeah.
But I don't know. He's just doing his job. And she explains to him the whole situation. Oh, my brother, he keeps talking to this thing, and it's so crazy.
In a very extravagant, very dramatic fashion.
Oh, yeah. She's
wiping her eyes.
She just has had enough of it. She cannot live with this anymore. And she just kind of keeps going for it. And by the end of the conversation, the psychiatrist says, oh, well, okay, yeah, let me speak with the nurse, and then I'll get back to you. And he has her go out, and then...
in a dramatic bout of irony. True irony.
Yeah, in the craziest twist. He goes up and says, have her committed. She's clearly a sociopath.
Yeah,
trying to lock up this poor innocent man who did nothing wrong.
Because the strange thing about that is, though Elwood Dowd sees Harvey, he comes across as so charming and so suave and so likable and so friendly and so sane.
Yeah.
That the psychologist sees him and speaks to him and says, oh, this man is just a good upstanding dude who likes to drink a little bit and hang out down at the pub. Yeah. And this woman is hysterical and insane, saying that she sees a 6-foot anthropomorphic bunny.
Yeah, she's trying to get her brother locked up. That's clearly an insane person. And this sort of pattern repeats itself throughout the movie. People will be all hysterical, and then he'll meet him, and there will be little goofs and gags like, oh, have you met my friend Harvey? and he tries to motion to, where Harvey, his imaginary friend, Tulpa thing, is standing. And, there's obviously no one there, but they just kind of play it off. They don't really notice.
Mm-hmm.
And they just see him as, like, a nice, likable guy. And he tells, like, good stories. And, he always is sitting at a booth in a bar, and people will just, like, come up to him and have a really nice conversation and think of him as a fine, upstanding citizen.
I wasn't thinking about this, but maybe we shouldn't give away the endings to some
well,
of these.
I kind of want to talk about what really happens, like what the reveal is for this. I mean, it came out 60 years ago.
Yeah, no spoilers, but yeah, I guess we'll spoil it a little bit.
Well, I'll at least say this. So, the way they explain this whole phenomenon... because there's a thing I forgot to mention that, there are certain parts where, like, things move on their own, and it's heavily implied that Harvey did it.
Yes.
And there's instances where, like, there's just... unexplainable things that happen.
And I hate to break it to you,
mystical, magical things.
but Tulpa can't move objects.
No,
they can't. That's just something they can't.
That's the way it differs. And the way they explain that is they say it's a puka.
Yeah.
Which is an Irish term, I believe.
Yeah, it's a Gaelic animal spirit.
Yeah.
Guardian animal spirit.
And it, like, manifests in different forms. It's basically just like a kind of fairy-like entity.
Mm-hmm. And it can be depicted as nefarious or benign, depending on what part of the Gaelic literature you're looking at. Because I've seen several instances pukas being considered nefarious, kind of like the classical fairies.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they're depicted as benign guardians. So.
Yeah. In this one, Harvey kind of plays kind of like a benevolent trickster in a way.
Mm-hmm.
He'll kind of play pranks on people and generally just kind of like to be around Harvey because he's good fun to be around,
Yeah.
That's kind of like the whole reason why he chose him in that sort of sense.
Yeah.
But overall, it's just a fun little film from, the 1950s that just shows, just like a Tulpa-like instance. And, it kind of makes you think, were the people that writing it did they have experience with that sort of imaginary friendish sort of thing?
I like to think that they didn't, and I like to think that they wanted it to be something, because you got to think of the 1950s.
Yeah.
And what's crazy about it is the viewpoints that people had back in the 1950s about our hero of the story, Dowd, are so strikingly similar to if you came up to someone today and said, "This is my friend Harvey," and pointed to an empty space beside you, people would be like, "This guy needs to be locked up."
Yeah.
I mean, and it's so crazy how that hasn't changed since the 1950s. We're talking almost 70 years ago.
Yeah, that's really it. And back then, wouldn't be surprising if, like, people would be a lot more aggressive to a person that did that,
Electroshock therapy, things like that.
Yeah, they would, put them in ice baths, electroshock
that was
therapy.
actually even in the movie, if you remember that.
Yeah. They were going to put the sister in an ice bath.
To try and get the crazy out of her.
Yeah.
But...
yeah, glad psychology has advanced quite a bit since then.
It's changed a lot in 70 years. Well, in that aspect. But
yeah, that's a good movie. So.
It is. It was good to watch. And one that's not quite as modern, but still, I believe it was in the 90s. It was a movie called Drop Dead Fred. Mm-hmm. And as a child, I watched this movie so many times. And the allusions to tulpamancy are quite apparent in this one. A girl has an imaginary friend when she's little that's called Drop Dead Fred. And this imaginary friend is manifest in an Englishman with reddish hair, and he wears a weird stripy green tuxedo. And
isn't he a little Irish?
He might be a little Irish, but he has an English accent because he's like, I know a little mega beast. Like, he's got, you shit yourself? Like, he's got this really English accent like this. He's like, I love hide and seek.
Yeah.
And so, he manifests in this way. And when she was a little kid, basically a lot of things happened where she ended up getting in trouble because Fred was a bit of a prankster too.
Yeah.
And every time something would happen, she would do it, but she would say Drop Dead Fred did it because he would tell her to say Drop Dead Fred did it. Mm-hmm. And there was an instance with a mud pie that her mom was very like controlling and somewhat, I'd say, mentally abusive. And her mother and father's marriage was failing, and the mother blamed her for that. Mm-hmm. And so she sort of retreated into this world with Fred, who was her imaginary friend. Well, one particular instance, her mom takes this little jack-in-the-box that Fred usually came out of whenever he wanted to play with the main character, and she take it and she duct taped it closed, and she said Fred is gone forever. And this little girl, it hurt her so bad, but then she grew up. And it flashes forward, and it's like 20 years later, and she's an adult, and she's living the humdrum adult life. She works at like an office, and she's got a boyfriend that walks all over her and cheats on her. And then she goes back to her. She basically ends up getting kicked out. Well, not kicked out, but she ends up not having a home. And she loses her job in the same day. So she has to move back in with her mom. And when she moves back in with her mom, it's the last thing she wanted to do. She ends up somehow, and I almost think it was symbolic, the taping up of the Jack-in-the-Box, because she finds it again.
Yeah.
And
that's really like symbolic of just like repressing something, putting it in a box and sealing it. But anyway, sorry.
It's okay. She finds it, she rips open the tape, and bam, out pops Fred, and he's back in her life. Mm-hmm. And as an adult, she has to deal with this wacky, crazy imaginary friend who really doesn't want her to grow up. He didn't want her to grow up. He's like, you done grew up and got married. I mean, he just hates the fact that she's a grown-up now.
So disgusting. So gross.
Yeah. And he calls her mom the mega bitch. And he's that little voice in her head, like her childhood, personified, that just says F you to the people she doesn't like,
Yeah. He has that very, like, wacky, rebellious, very childlike sort of nature about him.
Yeah, one of his favorite things to do is pick his nose and wipe it on her cheek.
Yeah.
And he calls her Snotface. That's his pet name for her.
Yeah.
So the whole movie actually ends up being incredibly deep toward the end, because she ends up going to a psychologist because she's seeing this imaginary friend that came back, and through a series of things that she did, excuse me, she ends up having certain things that happen. I don't want to spoil it because Drop Dead Fred is an amazing movie too. You guys should definitely watch it if you like Tulpa. The similarities are shocking here. And she ends up going to a psychologist, and he gives her these pills that are supposed to kill Fred, in quotes.
Yeah, it's like antipsychotics, something along that sort of line.
So she retreats to a mental space inside of her mind where all of her where her childhood traumas manifest, and it looks exactly like a dollhouse of her house. And her and Fred go in and they confront all of her fears, and together her and Fred help her find herself. And at the end there's a line he says where he says, "You don't need me anymore. You've got you now." And I think she kisses him and she says, "Drop Dead Fred." And when she does, he disappears, and she becomes
better person.
a better person. Yeah, it was like a vehicle through which she became a better person. She had more self-confidence. She stands up for herself after Fred's gone, and she throws a salad on the dude who's been treating her like shit for the past couple of years, and just walks out on him. And it's so empowering for her, and she takes her life back, and Fred helped her do that. And that right there makes me think so much of people who have Tulpa that help them get over their mental hang-ups, their problems, and everything like that. It's such a good movie for that.
Yeah, it definitely does. And it really kind of can show how Tulpas can help a host on the mental level in ways that other people can't, because a Tulpa can know you better than you know yourself, as we've said before. And they can, really understand what's bugging you, really kind of push you in the direction you need to do, or you need to go in order to kind of face what you're up against mentally and overcome it. One thing that I kind of don't see as an allusion to Tulpas in the movie is how it's kind of it kind of neatly sums it up in the end. For the sake of it being a movie, she can't walk around with this crazy, wacky guy all the time. That wouldn't make sense. So she kind of, leaves him. Whereas in Tulpamancy, it's more generally accepted to, kind of have a sort of lifetime companion in your tulpa. It is not to say that, tulpas don't ever go away. There are instances where that does happen. But generally, it's more just you have a tulpa and they're your friend forever, So...
There's actually an instance at the end of the movie where after she said goodbye to Fred, this little girl that lives next door plays a prank on her parents, and her parents are like, I can't believe you did this, and they're yelling at her.
Yeah.
And the little girl is sitting there laughing, and she holds her pinky out, because whenever her and Fred would ever do something that they thought was so cool, they would interlock pinkies.
Yeah.
That was like their handshake. And she looks over at this little girl, and this little girl's interlocking her pinky.
Yeah, so it kind of hints that Drop Dead Fred maybe kind of passed on to another person.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, honestly, I recommend that. It's a great movie. It's funny. There are some things that I still quote today from that movie. It's just, Fred is such a great character and a great imaginary friend. And I would say a tulpa, too. He's the closest thing I've seen to a tulpa.
Yeah.
Modern.
Yeah, like a sort of modern illusion, even though it's not exactly similar.
Yeah.
So, another movie that is surprisingly similar to the experience of having a tulpa is a movie that's very close to my heart. The movie called Her, directed by Spike Jonze.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, first of all, just a very well done movie.
Oh, yes.
In general. There's a lot of different aspects for it. It portrays a very unique and inspired future where technology is still very present but subdued. And generally, another thing about it is people are pretty detached from one another.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's multiple cases where people are just walking down the street and they're talking into, a Bluetooth device that, reads them their emails and a whole bunch of other things. And, but the big thing about the movie is, of course, Her, it's basically, there's an AI that's marketed as a personal AI.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of think Siri or Google.
But ramp it up times infinity.
Yeah.
Because it's literally a living person.
Yeah, it is basically indiscernible from a real human consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And, the way they market it in the movie is that, this can help get your life together. You have all these emails, it can organize them all and order them by priority. Which ones should I keep, which ones should I delete. It'll talk to you about your life, your career, and just help you in any way it can, personal assistant, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about this is that it's completely, open and friendly. It's just like talking to a person that lives in your computer.
I would honestly say it's like inducing an artificial tulpa.
Yeah.
That's what I would compare it to.
Basically, it's, pretty much that, except the difference is, of course, the AI can't see into your head.
Of course.
But if, you were talking to your AI on your desktop at your computer, it would be very similar to as if you were talking to your tulpa sitting beside you at the computer.
But there are things it can do, like recognize speech patterns and recognize your breathing.
Yeah.
And determine how you're feeling from that, but it can't peer directly into your conscious mind like a tulpa can.
And it's heavily implied that they're programmed with psychological and analytical things that kind of allow the AI to really understand the person they're kind of assigned to. And it's just a great movie in terms of how it portrays the relationship between the main character and the AI as it progresses.
Played by Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, Scarlett Johansson is
beautiful voice to have trapped in your head, I guess. But
most definitely. But it starts out, professional and casual, and just kind of doing stuff, but then she starts asking about his life, and he starts talking to her in, a more intimate manner, like, asking about her and what she's thinking about and things like that. He starts going out in public carrying his smartphone with her in it.
Mm-hmm. So she can see the world through the lens of the smartphone.
Yeah. The way he does it, he wears a shirt with a shirt pocket, and he just puts a little paper clip like midway down it so he can just rest the smartphone in it with a camera facing out. It's, just simple. It's well done, though. But basically, he has an earpiece in so he can hear her and he can talk to her, because it looks like he's just talking on a Bluetooth or something like that. But really, it's like they're walking together, having an interaction.
Yeah.
And that just like strikes me as so similar to what a Tulpamancer might do. Or, I've never personally done it out of my own personal anxieties about walking around talking to people.
This is my friend Harvey.
Yeah. But it's totally, you could just put a Bluetooth in your ear, walk along the street and talk to your Tulpa.
And people would think you were just talking to someone on the phone.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a problem at all.
But and the thing later on, it basically poses it's a really good allegory about consciousness.
Yeah.
And what consciousness is, especially as these artificial intelligences become more sentient and more aware of their existence, self-actualization.
Yeah.
What am I? I am this. And they start to, have thoughts on what they are, what it means to be conscious, what it means to be human, in quotation marks.
Yeah. And it poses a lot of good questions. And another thing I like about it is that as the relationship progresses, eventually the main character falls in love with Scarlett Johansson voice.
Yeah, I forget her name.
Samantha.
Samantha's
the name of the AI.
Yeah.
And they fall in love, and like it's head over heels, and it's just great. And one thing I particularly like, and this is a bit raunchy, is that it portrays what kind of Tulpa sex is like in a very kind of classy and tasteful way.
Yeah, it's not like you would think. It's done very, very well, I would say. Yeah. It's a bit hot and heavy, but it's done very well.
Basically, I'll kind of paraphrase it.
Spare the details. Please.
Yeah. But they're lying in bed, they're talking to each other, they're very close at this point, and then she starts telling him about like a fantasy she's having, that she's lying in bed next to him,
and basically you can see where it goes from there.
They kind of like have a shared fantasy, and it progresses, and they both really enjoy it.
Yeah. And it's just the first in a mini series of things that they do together that makes them fall even more in love. Yeah. And what I personally find so great about that movie is the fact that after he reveals to a friend that he is in love with his AI, she says, "I'm in love with mine too."
Yeah.
and it becomes almost commonplace that people are falling in love with these AI.
Yeah, it just is like a worldwide phenomenon. All of these AIs are, falling in love with their, I don't know. I wouldn't really know what to call it. It wouldn't be host, of course. It'd be more like user, I guess.
I guess user, yeah.
I don't know. That seems like too like dominant to me, though. But
yeah.
But
that's the only word I can think of. They are technology.
Yeah.
In essence, I mean, they are.
Yeah, they are at its core like a tool for a human.
Yeah.
But it really kind of defies that expectation throughout the movie, which is why it's really well done. But they start talking more, and they talk to a lot of different people. They start to talk to each other. I won't spoil how it ends, but it's pretty interesting. A little disheartening, but pretty interesting how it ends. And overall, it's not exactly like a Tulpa, because they are, an AI, and they allude very heavily that the AI is actually thinking like much faster than a regular human. You know, they're able to do calculations and
instantaneously.
They can read whole books in a fraction of a second and stuff.
Have you read that book? Oh yeah, I just read it.
Yeah.
Like yesterday? No, just now. I read it just now. It's a great book.
But despite all that, the AIs are still like so warm and genuine. It's, you know, really cool.
I would say the interactions and the social... As the main character progresses, he starts to prefer speaking to his AI over speaking to other human beings.
Yeah.
Because he just finds it more enjoyable, and that does happen sometimes with tulpamancers. They say, well, and I discourage this personally, but they say, well, screw the rest of the world. I've got my tulpa, I've got my friend.
Well, yeah, and throughout before that in the movie, he was kind of like, you know, getting more and more detached from other people and life in general. Like, there's the instance where he goes on a date, and, you know, he thinks it's going pretty well, and then, like, towards the end of the date, there's a conversation where it's like, I really want to commit to this, and he's like, I kind of want to take it slower, and that really turns her off, and it just, like, crashes and ends up horribly for him. And he's just, like, you can tell he's really fed up with the dating scene, and, you know, his work life is pretty bland. He doesn't have, like, a lot of friends at work.
Yeah.
You know, he just kind of, like, lives alone and does his own thing. So he's more detached, and he grows more detached due to his relationship with the AI. But I wouldn't say it's like a necessarily bad sort of thing for him to follow through with.
I mean, each individual person's definition of what's good and bad socially is completely varied.
Yeah.
And I would say that it's good in a way that he was happy. You know?
Yeah.
And ultimately, we all have to sort of achieve happiness for ourselves in some way, shape, or form. Sorry, guys, we're back. We had to take a little quick break. The next thing we're going to be talking about, though, I think you were done talking about her, weren't you?
All I was going to say is, you know, in the end, I think through their relationship, they found happiness. You know, he was happy, she was happy in the way that, you know, an AI could be perceived as being happy. I don't know. It brings up that question a lot, like, you know, is she really content with the relationship and everything that's going on? But I think, you know, yeah, it's a very good movie, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it has sort of an allegory to tulpamancy and a lot of its things that happens, a lot of the interactions between him and her, society at large, stuff like that. Our next thing we're going to talk about, our next movie, sort of modern, and it's pretty popular. It's kind of like a meme in the tulpa community. It's called Fight Club.
Fight Club.
And it's about the titular hero, Jack, I believe is his name. Played by...
the narrator is never given a name.
I thought his name was I Am Blank's...
No, that's just books he reads.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So the narrator's never given a name, but the titular hero, he is played by Edward Norton, and he has a very mundane, I buy IKEA, I dress up my apartment, I work in a cubicle... Very mundane life, just
very boring, and he is so disillusioned from it. It is insane. You know, he compares it to sleepwalking.
Well, he has insomnia.
Yeah, he has insomnia, and he's like, when you don't get enough sleep, everything's a copy of a copy of a copy.
Yeah, everything's a dream.
Yeah.
You've read the book. I've only seen the movie.
Oh, yeah. Chuck Palahniuk, he's a great writer.
Yeah.
And this is one of his most popular books for a good reason.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. Go ahead.
I just didn't know. Anyway, yeah. So basically what happens is throughout this main character's life, he's completely dissatisfied with it, but he doesn't know it. He's seeking something. He doesn't know quite what he's seeking, so he goes to different therapy sessions, some for testicular cancer, some for breast cancer, some for, what was it, sex addiction? Did he go to one for sex addiction?
Yeah, sex addiction, you know, Narcotics Anonymous. He doesn't have any of these issues that these people going to these therapy sessions are trying to work through. He just goes there so he can be part of the group and talk and, have a donut and some coffee and
also he wants to cry, because when he cries it helps him sleep.
Yeah.
And this character Tyler Durden pops up partway through, and there's been some discussion of whether or not he had DID or whether he was what Tyler Durden really is.
Well, I mean, we're gonna spoil it right away. We're going to kind of just say, Tyler Durden, this character, is in the narrator's head.
Yes. He is a figment of the main character's imagination. Tyler himself describes himself as an imaginary friend.
Yep.
And says, there's a quote where he says, "You are now firing a gun at your imaginary friend in front of like 400 pounds of nitroglycerin or something like that."
Yep.
And he's played by Brad Pitt in the movie. And they start a fight club, and he thinks that this entire time that Tyler Durden is the one who is the leader of this fight club, and it turns into like this anarcho movement, anarchist movement.
Yeah.
That becomes something, spirals out of control that he never intended, but Tyler intended. And this anarcho movement ends up becoming really big, to the point where at the end the plot is to blow up a bunch of banks. Yes.
Bunch of credit card companies in order to reset everything to zero, basically. They want everyone to have like a fresh start, and that's just kind of the goal of one of many goals. At first it's just kind of to play, essentially souped up pranks.
Yeah.
Like they'll deface corporate statues. They'll, set fires in buildings and stuff, and just do general first world anarchist sort of things.
And it escalates from there.
Yeah.
And it starts out as a fight club, and then it becomes a cult, essentially, an anarchist cult.
Yeah.
By the end of it. And Tyler Durden orchestrates the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so it turns out, you find out that it's Tyler doing it, but it's also the narrator doing it.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire reason for Tyler Durden's existence, I'd argue, is that the narrator was just so fed up with his life and hated, his modern life so much that he wanted to rebel against it, but he himself didn't have the capacity to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was just kind of a leap forward in his brain, a sort of psychological sort of
splintering. Yeah.
Yeah, and this alternate personality was created, Tyler Durden.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways, this is kind of like a negative side of the whole plurality Tulpa sort of thing, in that it shows a very dark sort of way things could go.
Oh yeah, the guy, because his essentially the narrator loses consciousness of what he's doing whenever Tyler is in control, in quotation marks. He goes to several cities around the world, and he just does all this stuff when Tyler is in control, and he remembers none of it.
Yep.
Which is not like Tulpa.
No. It's more It's more similar to what happens with people with very strong cases of dissociative identity disorder. It's called a blackout, where the main sort of personality, the main person, completely dissociates. They have no memory of what happens. They are basically not in existence anymore, and the alternate personality comes to the front. They take over control and, do whatever they want to do. And I just like to say right now, having a Tulpa is not going to have you have a blackout episode. That's not...
Yeah, you're not going to go try to kill the president or blow up all the credit card companies in the world because of your Tulpa. The reason why it's associated with Tulpamancy is because there are several pivotal scenes where he's talking to Tyler the way people talk to Tulpa. He's sharing a conversation with this separate being, right?
Yeah.
It's his personality manifest, his alternate personality manifest into a something he can see, right?
Yeah.
And even feel, because when he's fighting him, he's fighting himself, essentially. It shows him, instead of punching Tyler, he's punching himself in the head, basically. But the alternate personality is manifest in Tyler's form, in Tyler's body, and so he talks to him, and there's a moment where he reaches over and he hands him a beer, and Tyler takes a swig out of it. Then later on, it shows in the movie him actually just holding the beer over and dropping it on the ground.
Yep.
Same thing for a cigarette, I think. Basically, that's the only reason why it has any sort of similarity to Tulpamancy is because of the way Tyler manifests in a separate being that he sees as real.
Yeah. And really, Tulpamancy isn't about rebellion of the status quo. It's not about, trying to take one for yourself and fuck the man, fuck the system. It's more just about, undergoing a personal journey, trying to find happiness, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So
for a lot of people, it varies.
Yeah. It's just, the reason I think it became a meme is because it's so heavily ingrained in popular culture that this is, what happened in that movie, and it's kind of similar in some ways, and therefore, it's kind of cool and dark and edgy to kind of compare the two,
Yeah.
It's, I don't know. It's kind of fun, but...
It's fun to watch, it's fun to read, it's a spectacle, but it's not representative of the experience of Tulpamancy. It's about a very troubled man with dissociative identity disorder, and he creates his identity and it manifests in a separate being that he sees as Tyler Durden, which is not him, when it's in fact just him, just a different personality.
Yeah. And this personality is very, very strong right off the bat.
Oh, yes.
Immediately he's having
It's not gradual. It is bam. Tyler's here.
There he is, and he's immediately having blackouts. He's immediately not remembering things. I mean, for a Tulpa to create a blackout and completely remove and disassociate all the memories that occur from the host is extreme. There has to be other stuff going on, other sort of, clinically diagnosed disorders for that to happen along with this.
But I would say it's an enjoyable movie to watch. It's fun, but ultimately it's not representative of any sort of the experience of Tulpamancy, other than the fact that you're talking to a being who's not corporeally there.
Yeah, they're a part of your own mind, but you see them as a separate entity.
But that's become a little bit of a meme, and we've talked about 4 so far.
Yeah.
We've talked about Harvey, we've talked about Drop Dead Fred, we've talked about Her, and we've talked about Fight Club. Now it's our last one, which I know that you like a lot, called Ruby Sparks, right?
It's a pretty good... I wouldn't say it's up there with Her and Fight Club, but it's an interesting movie for what it is. So Ruby Sparks is about a writer...
Which you've actually... I'm sorry for interrupting, but you actually talked about this in a previous episode with Accidental Tulpa.
Yeah.
You talked about how this phenomenon of writers creating a character which springs to life.
Yep.
And so that's what... I just wanted to throw that in there.
That's exactly what happens in this movie. There's this writer, and he's been successful in the past, but he's struggling really hard to come up with new material. And his psychologist is just like, why don't you write about, someone coming into your life and making you feel happy? And he's like, don't worry about making it good, just make it bad. So this writer goes home, and he starts thinking, and he's, tries some things, crumples up some papers, and eventually he imagines and writes about this girl named Ruby. And she's a very attractive young woman with red hair and usually wears red dresses.
She's a very Zooey Deschanel type, and what I mean by that is she's the cool girl.
Yeah, she's kind of cool and quirky, and she'll hang out with you and eat a greasy burger and drink a beer.
All of her friends are guys and want to date her, but she doesn't like them like that.
Yeah. Basically, the ideal sort of female to come into your life randomly, and for a nerdy, shy guy.
And she's dated dudes in the past, but they've all been dickheads and they've hurt her, so she's guarded.
Yeah.
Zooey Deschanel.
So he just starts writing about her, and he makes himself a self-insert in these stories he writes about her. He talks about it to his psychologist, and he's like, oh, I'll change it later. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But he keeps writing about it. And eventually, seemingly out of nowhere, he sees Ruby in his kitchen.
And he freaks the fuck out.
Yeah, he loses it and is like, what's going on? What is going on? And she is clueless. She just thinks, we've been hanging out for a while. What's the big deal?
Because to Ruby,
yeah,
they have been hanging out. All the things he's been writing, she's really been doing with him. So to her, they have been hanging out for months. They're already in love.
Yep. So he freaks out, and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm going crazy. What's all this? And it kind of, hangs around that sort of theme for a while. And then eventually he goes out into public to meet up with, I believe, his ex-girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And Ruby walks by and starts talking to him, and he just ignores her, thinking,
I'm the only one who can see her.
Yeah. And then he realizes that, the ex can see Ruby as well.
That's where the similarities... Well, yeah, that's that one thing of Tulpamancy stops. Because
yeah. Other people
can't see your Tulpa.
Very unfortunately cannot. And so from there, he kind of accepts it a little, that she's, like, from his mind, but she's real.
Somehow, and we're not talking about... real, like our Tulpa are real, like they exist to us. We mean physically a corporeal being just poop pops out of nowhere.
Yeah,
it's a bit fantastical, but
it's very fantastical. And a lot of movies kind of follow this sort of theme, where it's just like, oh, all of a sudden this wacky character enters your life.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they kind of, do the whole romantic thing where they, fall in love, and, they hang out a lot, and...
Yeah. But the crux comes from the fact that she actually does exist as a character, and he finds out that he can simply write anything he wants into this book that he's writing about her, and it will change her personality, it'll change who she is. Like, if he were to type Ruby all of a sudden fell down the stairs, she would fall down the stairs.
Yep.
He can sculpt her life by writing it, because she's a character he made, but yet she's real. And as far as Tulpamancy goes, I would have preferred it, this is just my opinion, if she had not become a corporeal being. If she had stayed a figment of his mind the whole time, but so real to him that he could feel her, that he could touch her, that he could taste her, that she was that real to him, but she was a figment of his mind, but no one else could see her, I would have liked that movie so much more, instead of her just becoming, bam, a real human being.
Yeah, it's just, it kind of has that whimsical, fantastical thing it was going for. When, I mean, it works for the movie as it is, but it's, doesn't really relate to Tulpas, and also is kind of, it just... You have to suspend your disbelief.
Yeah.
We'll put it at that.
And up until the moment where the ex could see her, I was like, this movie is everything I've wanted in a Tulpa movie. And then the ex could see her, and I was like, wait, this chick's real now?
Yeah.
She just exists now?
It spawned from the ether.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a good movie. Yeah. It just let me down as a Tulpamancer to be like, oh, God, I thought this was the one. I thought we had a Tulpa movie. You know?
Anyway, disappointing. But anyway, to bring it back to the part where he's like, he learns that he can, like, kind of change things about her in order to, he can just, write whatever and it comes true for her. Eventually in the relationship, things get a bit rocky, so he decides, why don't I just, write in, she'll always love me. And then she gets too clingy. And then, like, he kind of says...
No, he says something like, she can't live without me.
Yeah.
And it literally interprets that she feels like she is dying when he's not around.
Yeah.
And she becomes super clingy and emotionally crippled when he's not around,
Yeah. And so he, like, writes something to kind of change it away from that, and then, she gets more depressed and, like, distant. And, he keeps writing and different things. And, nothing really seems to work. And eventually he just, reveals the truth to her.
Which is a terrible moment of self-actualization for her that leads her to essentially disappear.
Yeah, she just pretty much vanishes. And, he feels really guilt-ridden over it, of course, from all that's happened.
And I want to talk about, really quick, and interject,
Yeah.
The moralistic standpoint that I thought that did tie a little bit into Tulpamancy is trying to make your Tulpa be someone they don't want to be.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be the same thing as typing in a book. Like, it'd be like, let's say my Tulpa.
Yeah.
All of a sudden they're like, I really like this thing. And I'm like, I can't stand that thing. I don't want you to like that thing, so I'm going to impose that change on you. You no longer like this thing.
Yeah.
That is so fucked up.
Yeah. Through sheer force of will, you change your Tulpa's personality.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically denying them as a separate sentient entity, which is kind of the whole goal, you know?
Yeah. One of my Tulpas loves pop music. I cannot stand pop music. But I'm not going to change that about her. She just developed to like it. And so whenever a pop song comes on that she wants to hear, I won't change it if she's with me. If she's in the Wonderland, I'll change it. But if she's out in the physical space with me, I'll listen to it. Yeah. For her. I'll do it for her, as they say.
That's what you got to do. You got to put your ego aside and let your Tulpa be your own person.
Literally put your ego aside.
Literally put your ego aside, yeah.
So, this actually is running a little bit longer than I thought it would, to be honest. Do you still want
We should just make it a two-parter.
You want to make it a two-parter?
Yeah.
Okay, in the next part of this is going to be part one of a two-parter. We're going to talk about society at large's view of tulpamancy in regards to popular culture.
Mm-hmm.
And in regards to... You know what? We're back from a hiatus. Let's just talk about it now, because I don't even know if we'll be able to talk for an hour about that.
Yeah.
So let's just throw it on now. Never mind. Scratch that. We're going to talk right now about how these views that have been anything similar to a tulpa has been shown in pop culture. You get how they've shaped the public at large's viewpoint on tulpamancy.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it has shaped them to believe that adults with imaginary friends are, one, they're mentally unstable. They're probably going to blow up some credit card companies.
Yeah.
Two, they are crippled socially. They don't ever want to talk to anyone else other than their tulpa, and they're going to completely alienate and isolate themselves, if tulpa are even real.
Yeah.
Because the fact that it's been fictionalized so many times leads to people to believe that it's not real.
And the way it's portrayed is always, very fantastical.
Oh, yeah.
Very, out of nowhere, this wacky, crazy happenstance happens, and it flips my life upside down.
Yeah. And often the grim reality of having a tulpa is a lot of tulpa are born, from what I've seen, out of loneliness.
Yeah.
Or out of a necessity for some sort of companionship. This is not the general rule. This is not like the common...
It's just a trend we've kind of noticed.
Anecdotal.
Yeah,
throughout our years.
Anecdotally. Is that a lot of people who create tulpa are kind of in a low point in their life, especially socially, and they really find a strong need for a companion that they can, trust very deeply.
Someone that won't hurt them or leave them.
Yeah.
Or leave them feeling like they're inadequate in some way. Someone who knows them better than they know themselves and can also help them help themselves.
Yeah.
And that's something really good. But to see the society at large, they don't know all this at first glance. At first glance, they see a man talking to an imaginary friend, is what they think it is, and they think this person is crazy. I was telling you the other day how I was on the train in Atlanta, and I saw a man speaking to himself.
Uh-huh.
And he was talking out loud to himself. He was like, "Nah, man, yeah." Yeah, and it was like he was having he didn't have a Bluetooth in. He was just talking to himself. There was no one else around him. And he was sitting on the train just talking to himself. And I thought to myself, now this person could have a tulpa, but I sincerely doubt it. But they could, right?
Yeah. It's
my
possibility.
But my first thought when I saw him is, and I'm a tulpamancer. I've got tulpa.
Yeah.
My first thought was, that guy's crazy.
Yeah. And the people you're around are kind of doing the thing that happens when you see a crazy person on public transportation. You just look straight ahead, pretend it's not even happening.
Yeah.
It's not happening. You don't look, you definitely don't make eye contact.
Yeah.
You just keep doing your thing.
And I would like to give a physical description of this man. He wasn't your stereotypical crazy wino bum on a train. No, he was a young, well-dressed African-American man. Well-dressed. He looked like he had some money. And he was just sitting there on the train, just talking to himself out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't look, your stereotypical bum whining about the state of the world on a train to himself looks, he's got tattered clothing. He's probably got a bag in his hand with a bottle.
Yeah, he's got the shivers from the withdrawal from the heroin.
Yeah, this guy looked like he just came from a recording studio. Like, he looked like he was dapper.
Yeah.
And yet he was sitting there talking to himself out loud, and not only that, but he was laughing at himself, having a conversation with himself. Now, see, the dichotomy there is, the part of me that has I have a tulpa, would say, this man could have one. Yeah. But what are the odds? It's such a niche movement. I think this man might just be talking to himself.
Honestly, yeah, it's tough to say. You'd have to ask him to really find out. You know, that's the key. And who knows? He might have some sort of condition that he's working through. But at least from what you've told me, it seems like it was a positive experience he was going through.
Yeah, I mean, he was laughing.
Yeah, he was having a good
conversation
time
with himself.
He might have learned a whole lot about himself from that conversation. You don't know.
Who knows? Who knows? But I think that is one thing. But I'm sorry, that kind of doesn't tie into... That was a personal experience, but... The way society views... We were talking about it as well with one of my tulpa about how people are not open to new ideas that manifest, that come out of nowhere, especially whenever they're completely different from anything that's in our normal ideology or our normal frame of mind.
Yeah.
If it comes out of nowhere and it's challenging to everything we believe, our first reaction is going to be distrust and pessimism.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes sense for human beings, because there's just a lot of bullshit out there, to be frank. You know, someone says, oh, you can have this fantastical thing and it'll change your life forever. People are automatically going to think, what's the catch? Am I buying a timeshare here? What's the deal? And that's a natural, defense mechanism. We have these mental defense mechanisms that kind of just go off automatically whenever we experience a new phenomenon in the modern world.
And my tulpa, Ava, she asked this question. She's so sweet and she's so naive. Ava asked, why can't people just, when they see new things, why can't they meet it with optimism and curiosity as opposed to pessimism and distrust? I told him it's human nature.
Yeah.
We're not like, little ponies. We can't just meet things with fervor and enthusiasm all the time. We don't want to get burned. We don't want to get hurt, No. And in nature, we like to approach new things with caution and pessimism. I suppose we think of all the things that could go wrong before we think of what if this goes right. And once we're given enough evidence that enough things can go right, we'll proceed further. Much like you going through a thread, seeing all these people talking about all the experience, at first you're like, what is this? This is weird. This is cringy. This is strange. And then all these people are saying over and over, I'm so happy. I've had such a good time. I do not regret this. This is great. And then you got that one guy saying, oh, my tulpa tried to cut my head off and throw it in the sewer. And you're like, that guy, I'm going to take that one instance and say that's a wild, crazy instance, and I'm going to follow these 17 other good instances that I'm reading about.
Yeah, but to kind of draw on that, I think one of the reasons it's so hard for tulpamancy in general to kind of come off as acceptable in the public eye is that it's so common, so very common, that the kind of red flag for a crazy person is either A, seeing things, or hearing voices that aren't there. A, seeing things, B, hearing voices that aren't there.
Yeah.
And it's just very hard to get around that perception because people notice those two things, their mind jumps to that conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's challenging because you want to say, there's so many ways it can be a positive experience, it can be so beneficial, and it can help people and, get past things that are going wrong with their life, but, it's really hard to just get around that barrier at first glance. And, however, it does serve its purpose because, if we didn't recognize red flags in people that kind of signify, maybe there's something going wrong in their head, we would all be, getting murdered from crazy axe murderers and stuff.
Yeah. I think that I can add to that point. Whenever an instance comes up in popular culture or in popular media where we see a person talking to themselves, they're always represented as crazy.
Yeah.
There's never a guy that's completely healthy and functional represented in popular culture. They're always, Charles Manson heard voices,
Yeah.
It's never portrayed as a healthy thing, and that's one of the key reasons why. And there's a guy named Tulpa-like, I think is his name, right?
Yeah, it's Ford. is his real name, but
yeah. He has a channel on YouTube too, and he talks about psychology and why we think why the public at large seems to view people that have tulpa are insane or anything like that. And I'm sure in the past it had to do with Christianity and stuff like that, and calling this person perhaps someone possessed by a demon or something like that.
Well, that's just the way they kind of explained all mental disorders back in the day,
Yeah. Sorry about this.
You done?
Shush. Alright, I'm good. Sorry about that, folks. So yeah. When it comes to pop culture, things the tulpomancy at large seems to be, or speaking to things that aren't really there, seems to be always seen as detrimental, negative. There's never a positive thing. And I really hope sometime in the future there's a positive representation of people who talk to themselves, but I don't see...
Nah, it's not going to be anytime soon.
Yeah.
We have a long way to go, folks.
Yeah.
But, till then, we'll be here with you.
Yeah.
We'll be all rooting for each other, hopefully.
Yeah. And actually, this has gone on for about twice as long as our usual episode. I hope you guys listened all the way through. We're very thankful that you did. We're sorry again for the hiatus.
Yeah.
In closing, just remember, always butter your toast. And...
What?
I'm just
butter your toast.
I'm just messing around.
Okay.
Basically, always remember that even if people around you if you choose to tell this to people around you, always remember that if they don't openly accept it right off the rip and they're like, they meet it with sort of caution and pessimism, there's nothing wrong with you. Okay?
No.
There's nothing wrong with you for trying to create a tulpa and trying to better your life with a tulpa. It's a natural human response to meet things like that with caution and pessimism.
Yeah, it's just, part of the culture, part of our society, and it has its purpose. And who knows, eventually, after going home and thinking about it, maybe this person will open up a bit and try to change their mind,
Mm-hmm.
You never know. I mean, I was the same way, as I've said before.
I was too, when I first found out about it.
So it's don't take it at face value if people call you crazy.
Yeah. We've all been called crazy. Anyone who
Yeah.
has a tulpa has been called crazy at least once, if not in person on the internet.
That's how it is.
Yeah, that's going to do it for this episode of Tulpa Time, guys. Thank you for tuning back in. We're glad to be back. We'll try to post a little more regularly now. We just got a lot going on in our lives. And
that's true.
We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.